Look around you. Society tells aging men to fade quietly into the background, to give up your voice, to surrender your needs for others. This is not just wrong, it's destructive. The moment you begin prioritizing everyone else's agenda over your own is the moment you lose your authority, your respect, your very sense of self. Men in their 60s and beyond face a profound choice: continue the self-sacrifice that's expected or reclaim what's rightfully yours. In old age, focusing on yourself isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. The human psyche demands boundaries. The time for silent sacrifice is over. Your life demands your attention now. You've heard it all your life: put others first, sacrifice your needs, be the rock everyone leans on. But that philosophy has an expiration date, and most men sail right past it. I've encountered thousands of men in their golden years who believed that silent sacrifice was noble. It's not noble. It's a form of slow self-erasure. The truth is stark. Society trains men to become invisible as they age. You're expected to fade into the background, offering wisdom only when asked, resources when needed, but never taking up space with your own desires. This is precisely when you must do the opposite. This is when you must reclaim your authority. Let me be clear about what happens when you don't. I've seen it countless times in my clinical practice. Men who wake up at 70, realizing they've spent decades living someone else's life. The psychological toll is devastating. Carl Jung would call this a form of shadow suppression, the authentic self buried under layers of social expectation until it either dies or erupts in crisis. Stop explaining your decisions. This is where reclaiming your authority begins. When I was consulting with a former business executive, let's call him Robert, he would prepare 3-paragraph justifications for why he wanted to spend his retirement funds on a sailing trip. 3 paragraphs. To spend his own money. The compulsion to justify your choices is a submission to external validation. It's a confession that you don't believe you have the right to direct your own life. The moment you stop explaining is the moment you reclaim psychological sovereignty. When someone questions your choice, simply state, "That's what I've decided." Period. No elaboration necessary. Watch what happens. People will respect you more, not less. Humans instinctively recognize authentic authority. They sense when a man knows his own mind and stands firmly in his truth. Now, about those boundaries. Setting clear boundaries without apology requires understanding a fundamental truth about human interaction. Respect is not earned through accommodation. It's earned through consistency and clarity. When you accommodate constantly, you train others to disregard your needs. I've seen men in their 70s exhausted from driving across town weekly to help adult children who never learned self-sufficiency, precisely because these men never set boundaries. Your no must become as comfortable in your mouth as your yes. Practice it daily. No, I won't be available then. No, that doesn't work for me. No justification, no elaborate excuse, just a firm, dignified refusal. The discomfort you feel is merely the withdrawal symptom of breaking your addiction to approval. Your time is the most precious, non-renewable resource you possess, especially now. Every hour squandered on obligations that don't serve your purpose is an hour stolen from your limited supply. Men in their later years often fail to recognize the urgency of time allocation. The psychological foundation of this error is the denial of mortality, as if endless tomorrows await. Protect your time like the precious resource it is. This means auditing your schedule ruthlessly. Every commitment should pass through a filter. Does this truly matter to me? Does this align with my values and purpose? If not, eliminate it without hesitation. This isn't selfishness. It's clarity. It's recognition that your remaining years deserve to be lived with intention, not frittered away in social obligation. What's truly at stake here is nothing less than your identity. When you fail to reclaim your authority, you surrender authorship of your life story. You become a supporting character rather than the protagonist. The existential weight of this realization often comes too late for many men, who wonder why their lives feel hollow despite decades of dutiful service. The path forward is clear but demanding. It requires facing the discomfort of disappointing others and standing firm when met with resistance. But beyond that discomfort lies freedom, the freedom to finally live according to your own values, priorities, and purpose. This is the ultimate responsibility of your later years, to become fully yourself before time runs out. I've observed a peculiar phenomenon among men as they age. The more wisdom they accumulate, the more they feel compelled to dispense it, often to those who haven't asked for it and aren't prepared to receive it. This compulsion to fill silence with words is a fundamental misunderstanding of power. The most influential men I've encountered understand that strategic silence is not emptiness, it's presence. Consider the ancient Stoic practice of measured speech. Epictetus would say, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Yet modern society bombards us with the opposite message. Speak up, make yourself heard, don't be silent. This creates men who talk endlessly but say very little of consequence. The psychological underpinning here is fascinating. Speech often serves not communication but self-soothing. We speak to alleviate our own discomfort with silence rather than to convey something meaningful. Listen more, speak only when necessary. I remember sitting with a retired judge, a man who had spent decades weighing his words carefully because they carried the weight of law. In retirement, he found himself talking constantly, offering opinions on everything from his daughter's marriage to his neighbor's lawn care. When I asked him why, he paused, then admitted, "I'm afraid of becoming irrelevant." This fear of irrelevance drives many older men to verbal excess, but it achieves precisely the opposite effect. Your words become inflation currency. The more you print, the less each one is worth. The practice is straightforward but challenging. Before speaking, ask yourself 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If your intended words don't meet at least 2 of these criteria, maintain your silence. You'll find that 80% of what you are about to say fails this test. In that safe space, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear what others are actually saying rather than merely waiting for your turn to speak. The quality of your relationships transforms almost immediately. Protect your time like the precious resource it is. This means auditing your schedule ruthlessly. Every commitment should pass through a filter. Does this truly matter to me? Does this align with my values and purpose? If not, eliminate it without hesitation. This isn't selfishness, it's clarity. It's recognition that your remaining years deserve to be lived with intention, not frittered away in social obligation. What's truly at stake here is nothing less than your identity. When you fail to reclaim your authority, you surrender authorship of your life story. You become a supporting character rather than the protagonist. The existential weight of this realization often comes too late for many men, who wonder why their lives feel hollow despite decades of dutiful service. The path forward is clear but demanding. It requires facing the discomfort of disappointing others and standing firm when met with resistance. But beyond that discomfort lies freedom, the freedom to finally live according to your own values, priorities, and purpose. This is the ultimate responsibility of your later years, to become fully yourself before time runs out. I've observed a peculiar phenomenon among men as they age. The more wisdom they accumulate, the more they feel compelled to dispense it, often to those who haven't asked for it and aren't prepared to receive it. This compulsion to fill silence with words is a fundamental misunderstanding of power. The most influential men I've encountered understand that strategic silence is not emptiness, it's presence. Consider the ancient Stoic practice of measured speech. Epictetus would say, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Yet modern society bombards us with the opposite message. Speak up, make yourself heard, don't be silent. This creates men who talk endlessly but say very little of consequence. The psychological underpinning here is fascinating. Speech often serves not communication but self-soothing. We speak to alleviate our own discomfort with silence rather than to convey something meaningful. Listen more, speak only when necessary. I remember sitting with a retired judge, a man who had spent decades weighing his words carefully because they carried the weight of law. In retirement, he found himself talking constantly, offering opinions on everything from his daughter's marriage to his neighbor's lawn care. When I asked him why, he paused, then admitted, "I'm afraid of becoming irrelevant." This fear of irrelevance drives many older men to verbal excess, but it achieves precisely the opposite effect. Your words become inflation currency. The more you print, the less each one is worth. The practice is straightforward but challenging. Before speaking, ask yourself 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If your intended words don't meet at least 2 of these criteria, maintain your silence. You'll find that 80% of what you are about to say fails this test. In that safe space, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear what others are actually saying rather than merely waiting for your turn to speak. The quality of your relationships transforms almost immediately. Now, about unsolicited advice, that reflexive habit most aging men develop. Jung would attribute this to the Senex archetype taken to its shadow extreme, the wise old man who becomes the rigid know-it-all. The compulsion to correct, instruct, and advise without invitation stems from a desperate need to affirm your value. But value isn't demonstrated by imposing wisdom, it's recognized when wisdom is sought out. End the habit of unsolicited advice. This requires recognizing a painful truth. Your children, grandchildren, neighbors, and friends are living in a world fundamentally different from the one you navigated. Your solutions, however successful they were for you, may be utterly inapplicable to their circumstances. The humility to acknowledge this is not weakness, it's wisdom in its highest form. The practice here is one of restraint. When the urge to advise arises, and it will, constantly pause. Ask yourself, have they explicitly asked for my guidance on this matter? If not, offer your presence instead of your prescription. This doesn't mean you never share your wisdom. It means you wait until it's sought. When someone actually asks for your perspective, they've created the psychological receptivity necessary to hear it. Silence itself becomes a tool for respect and power when wielded with intention. In negotiations, in confrontations, in moments of high emotion, the man who can maintain purposeful silence holds the psychological advantage. This isn't about manipulation, it's about self-control and discernment. The space between stimulus and response, that's where your freedom lies. Use silence as a tool for respect and power. I've counseled executives who dominated boardrooms not with forceful speeches, but with strategic silence. When everyone has spoken, when emotions run high, when confusion reigns, that's when the measured, thoughtful response carries weight. But this requires mastering the discomfort of silence, that primal urge to fill dead air. Practice sitting in silence daily, not just external silence but internal silence, the quieting of that constant narrative voice. Start with just 2 minutes and gradually extend it. This meditation practice isn't spiritual indulgence. It's practical training for moments when emotional reactivity threatens your dignity and authority. What's truly at stake here is your presence. When you fill every moment with words, with opinions, with noise, you diminish your impact. You become background static rather than a clear signal. But when you speak only what matters, when you listen deeply, when you embrace purposeful silence, you become a man whose words carry weight, whose presence commands respect without demanding it. This is your responsibility now, to cultivate the kind of silence that speaks volumes about your self-mastery. Not the silence of withdrawal or defeat, but the powerful silence of a man who knows exactly what he wants to say and precisely when it needs saying. Let me tell you about a man I met in Calgary, 73 years old, former construction manager. For decades, he'd worked himself to exhaustion, built homes for others while neglecting his own foundation. When his wife passed, he discovered a terrifying truth. He had no idea who he was beyond his roles as provider, husband, father. The identity crisis nearly destroyed him. This is the crisis waiting for every man who fails to invest in himself, who treats self-care as selfishness rather than survival. The psychological architecture here is fundamental. Erickson's developmental stages place older adults squarely at the crossroads of generativity versus stagnation, followed by integrity versus despair. The men who fail to invest in themselves invariably fall into stagnation, then despair. Not because they didn't contribute, often they contributed tremendously, but because they never built a relationship with themselves. The self becomes a stranger, and you cannot live peacefully with a stranger. Prioritize physical well-being without guilt. I'm constantly astonished by the number of older men who apologize for taking time to exercise, for scheduling medical appointments, for resting when exhausted. They'll drive a grandchild across town without hesitation, but treat their own doctor's appointment as a selfish indulgence. This distorted relationship with the self stems from a lifetime of conditioning. The good man provides, he doesn't need. The practice here isn't complex, but it requires a complete reframing. Your physical health is not a personal luxury, it's the foundation of everything you hope to offer others. When you neglect it, you're not being selfless, you're compromising your capacity to be present and effective. Begin with non-negotiable health blocks in your schedule. Your morning walk, your strength training, your medical checkups, these are appointments with yourself that deserve the same respect you give to any other commitment. The resistance you'll feel isn't logical, it's emotional and deeply ingrained. You'll hear that voice suggesting you're being self-indulgent. Recognize it as the voice of outdated programming, not wisdom. The truly selfish act is neglecting your health until you become a burden on those you love. a harsh truth many men refuse to confront. Pursue intellectual growth on your terms. The retirement phase often brings intellectual atrophy for men who define themselves through work. Their minds, once engaged daily with complex problems, begin to wither without challenge. The neuroscience is unambiguous. Cognitive decline accelerates in the absence of novel intellectual stimulation. This isn't an inevitable consequence of aging, it's a consequence of surrender. The approach is straightforward. Identify subjects that genuinely interest you, not what you should learn, but what awakens your curiosity. Perhaps it's classical philosophy you never had time to explore, or quantum physics or Civil War history. The subject matter is less important than the engagement. Dedicate time daily to this pursuit. Read deeply. Take notes. Discuss with others. Treat this intellectual journey with the same seriousness you once brought to your professional development. What's happening neurologically is fascinating. You're creating new neural pathways, strengthening cognitive resilience against decline. But beyond the brain benefits, you're developing a relationship with yourself as a thinking being, independent of your productive value to others. This is essential groundwork for meaning in later years. Invest in emotional clarity through solitude. Modern society has pathologized solitude, treating it as synonymous with loneliness. This is a profound misunderstanding. Solitude is the state in which a man finally hears himself clearly, without the distorting influence of others' expectations or needs. Loneliness is the painful awareness of unwanted isolation. They are not the same, and confusing them has robbed many men of essential self-connection. The practice requires courage. Schedule periods of deliberate solitude. Start with an hour daily if possible. Early morning often works best. No phone, no television, no distractions, just you, perhaps with a journal, perhaps with nothing but your thoughts. The discomfort you'll initially feel is informative. It reveals how dependent you've become on external stimulation, how unfamiliar you are with your own mental landscape. In this solitude, patterns emerge, regrets surface, unfulfilled desires make themselves known. This isn't pleasant, but it's necessary. Without this clarity, you're navigating your remaining years with a foggy compass. The psychological maturity of your later years depends on this willingness to see yourself clearly, without the identities you've hidden behind. Your relationship with yourself will ultimately determine your experience of aging. Men who've invested in self-knowledge approach their later years with equanimity, rather than fear, with purpose rather than confusion. The responsibility here isn't trivial. It's to become the author of your remaining chapters rather than a character being written by circumstance, habit, or others' expectations. I witnessed a remarkable transformation in a 68-year-old professor emeritus. For decades, he maintained dozens of professional relationships, holiday card lists, obligatory lunches, the social portfolio of a successful academic. When I asked him which of these connections truly enriched his life, he stared blankly, then admitted perhaps 3 or 4. Yet he continued investing equal energy across his entire social landscape. This is the relationship equivalent of poor financial planning, diversification without discrimination, spreading yourself so thin that nothing receives adequate investment. The psychological principle at work here relates to what the existentialists called authenticity. As men age, the gap between authentic and inauthentic relationships becomes increasingly unsustainable. Maintaining connections based on obligation, history, or appearance creates what psychologists call emotional labor, the exhausting work of presenting a self that doesn't align with your inner reality. This labor becomes increasingly costly as your energy reserves naturally diminish with age. Evaluate which relationships truly serve you. This isn't about coldly discarding people, but about honest assessment. Carl Jung would frame this as part of the individuation process, the journey toward becoming your complete self rather than the self others expect. Ask yourself, in whose presence do I feel most alive? With whom can I be most authentic? Which interactions leave me energized rather than depleted? These questions aren't selfish, they're necessary for psychological integrity. The practical approach requires courage. Make a list of your current relationships. Beside each name, note whether interactions with this person generally leave you feeling better or worse. This isn't about whether they're good people. Many depleting relationships involve perfectly decent individuals who simply don't resonate with your authentic self. Pay attention to physical cues during and after interactions, tension, headaches, fatigue, or conversely, renewed energy and clarity. Your body often recognizes authentic connections before your conscious mind does. This evaluation will likely reveal uncomfortable truths. Men often maintain friendships long past their natural expiration date out of habit or perceived obligation. The discomfort you feel at the thought of stepping back from certain relationships is worth examining. Is it genuine concern for the other person or fear of social judgment? Is it compassion or avoidance of necessary confrontation? Release obligation-based connections. This doesn't require dramatic confrontations or formal terminations. For most peripheral relationships, simply reducing investment is sufficient. Fewer lunches, shorter phone calls, longer gaps between interactions. The relationship naturally finds its appropriate level without explicit discussion. For more central relationships that no longer serve your growth, more direct communication may be necessary. Not accusation, but honesty. My life is taking a different direction now, and I'm focusing my energy differently. The resistance here comes from deeply ingrained socialization. Men are taught that loyalty means permanence, that changing relationship dynamics indicates failure or betrayal. This is a profound misunderstanding. True loyalty is to authenticity, both yours and theirs. Maintaining pretense serves neither party. There's dignity in acknowledging when a connection has served its purpose and allowing it to evolve or conclude naturally. Cultivate depth over breadth in friendships. Research in developmental psychology shows that meaningful social connections are essential for healthy aging, but the emphasis is on quality, not quantity. One study found that older adults with just 3 deep, authentic friendships showed greater psychological wellness than those with extensive but superficial social networks. This aligns with the socio-emotional selectivity theory, which suggests that as time horizons shorten, emotional satisfaction becomes more important than information gathering or network expansion. The practice here is intentional investment. Once you've identified those few relationships that truly nourish you, dedicate yourself to their deepening. This means vulnerability, sharing not just activities or opinions, but your authentic struggles, fears, and hopes. It means presence, giving these few chosen connections your full attention rather than fragmented awareness. And it means consistency, regular, reliable engagement rather than sporadic intensity. For many men, this requires learning a new language of intimacy, particularly with other men. The cultural conditioning that restricted male bonding to activities and surface-level exchange must be overcome. This isn't about forced emotional performances. It's about allowing natural depth to develop when you remove artificial constraints on authentic connection. What's truly at stake in this relationship refinement is nothing less than your experience of meaning in later years. The research is unequivocal. Men with few but deep connections face mortality with greater equanimity than those surrounded by superficial acquaintances. The existential challenge here is profound. Will you invest your remaining relational energy in authentic connection, or will you continue the exhausting maintenance of a social facade that no longer serves your true self? I've counseled countless men who approach their final decades with a fundamental misconception about legacy. They believe legacy is what you leave behind: the money, the buildings, the businesses. This materialistic view of legacy is profoundly inadequate. True legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you become before you leave. The man who masters himself creates a legacy that resonates through generations, not through his possessions but through his example. This psychological truth connects to what the existentialists called authenticity in the face of finitude. As mortality becomes increasingly undeniable, men face a choice: continue performing the roles they've always played, or finally become the authors of their own existence. This isn't merely philosophical, it's practical. The self-mastered man in his later years becomes a lighthouse for younger generations, navigating their own storms, not through preaching, but through being. Channel energy into meaningful creation. Creation is the antidote to stagnation, and stagnation is the true enemy of the aging man. I've observed a stark contrast between men who continue creating well into their 80s and those who merely consume. The creators maintain cognitive flexibility, purpose, and vitality that far exceeds their consuming counterparts. This isn't coincidence, it's causation. The creative process engages neural networks that otherwise atrophy, challenging the brain to maintain its adaptive capacity. The practice here is straightforward but demanding. Identify what you can uniquely create. This might be woodworking, writing, mentoring, gardening. The medium matters less than the act of bringing something new into existence. The critical element is that it must be creation, not mere busy work. It must challenge you, demand your full presence, and result in something that didn't exist before you applied yourself to the task. Many men resist this, believing their creative window has closed. This is nonsense. History abounds with examples of men who produced their greatest work in their seventh, eighth, even ninth decades. Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Guggenheim Museum at 91. Giuseppe Verdi completed Falstaff at 80. What they understood was that creativity doesn't diminish with age unless you allow it to. What changes is not capacity but patience for meaningless activity. Embrace selective mentorship on your terms. The conventional wisdom suggests that older men should freely dispense their accumulated wisdom to younger generations. This is half right but dangerously incomplete. Yes, mentorship is powerful, but only when it's selective and reciprocal. The indiscriminate mentor becomes a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration, clinging to relevance by forcing unwanted advice on unreceptive ears. The approach requires discernment. Wait for the ask. The younger person who actively seeks your guidance has created the psychological receptivity necessary for genuine transmission of wisdom. This isn't about withholding, it's about respect for others' journeys and recognition that wisdom cannot be forced upon the unwilling. When someone does seek your mentorship, engage fully but temporarily, set clear parameters, define what you're offering and for how long. This creates valuable structure and prevents the relationship from devolving into dependency. What's fascinating about this selective approach is that it actually increases your impact. When your mentorship is not constantly available, it becomes more valued. When it's structured rather than open-ended, it demands greater engagement from the mentee. The greatest teachers understand that accessibility and effectiveness often exist in inverse proportion. Build a legacy of self-respect, not self-sacrifice. This final principle integrates everything we've discussed. The man who continues sacrificing himself to others' expectations in his later years teaches a devastating lesson to those watching, that a man's worth lies only in his utility to others, that his needs remain forever secondary, that self-neglect is the price of virtue. Is this truly the legacy you wish to leave? Consider instead the man who demonstrates healthy boundaries, who pursues his authentic interests without apology, who maintains meaningful relationships while releasing depleting ones. This man teaches something revolutionary in today's culture, that self-respect and compassion for others are not opponents but partners. That wisdom includes knowing when to say no as well as when to say yes. That aging can be a process of increasing authenticity rather than diminishing relevance. The practice requires daily recommitment to your own path. Each time you're pulled toward old patterns of self-sacrifice, pause and ask, what example am I setting? What lesson am I teaching through my choices right now? This isn't theoretical, it's practical. The children, grandchildren, and younger colleagues in your life are absorbing your example far more than your advice. They're learning how a man navigates his final chapters by watching how you navigate yours. What's truly at stake here is nothing less than your final opportunity for authenticity. After decades potentially compromised by necessary obligations, social expectations, and economic imperatives, these years offer unprecedented freedom to finally align your outer life with your inner truth. This isn't self-indulgence, it's the ultimate responsibility to become fully yourself before you no longer have the chance. This is how you transform from a man who merely existed into one who truly lived. The question before you now isn't whether you'll age, that's inevitable. The question is whether you'll age with the dignity of self-mastery or the regret of self-abandonment. Every man faces this threshold. Most step back from it, retreating to the comfortable prison of others' expectations. They choose the familiar pain of self-neglect over the necessary discomfort of reclaiming their authority. But you now understand the cost of that retreat, a life half-lived, a self half-known, a legacy of silent compliance rather than bold authenticity. The alternative demands courage, the courage to finally stand firmly in your own truth after decades of compromise. There's an order that emerges when a man aligns his actions with his deepest values, and there's a chaos that consumes him when he doesn't. Your remaining years can be the most authentic of your life, or the most hollow. That choice belongs to you alone. Ask yourself, will you die wondering who you might have been, or will you live knowing exactly who you are?